Sometimes you bend, sometimes you stand, sometimes you turn your back to the wind.
Good afternoon. The left is angry. The left is angry because we are on to them. We are on to them. We are on to their efforts to ruin the integrity of the elections. We remember in 2008 when Project Vote and Acorn were responsible for 400,000 fraudulent voter registrations and the criminal investigations that came, not from Obama's Justice Department. Why would the Justice Department investigate President Obama's former employer for voter registration fraud? In fact, they continue to work with them. Project Vote is now working with the Justice Department on election integrity matters. It's like having the FBI work with the mafia on anti-racketeering matters. We're on to them. Support for voter ID is increasing across the country. Cleaning up the lists is increasing across the country. Making sure fraudulent voter registrations don't get through, that's the wave across the country. And Judicial Watch specifically has looked at the election rolls, and we've exposed how that there are more people on the election rolls in key states than are there living and voting. So if you've got dead people on the rolls, it means you're probably not keeping good track of who ought to be there. And the problem is the left has seen this as their playground, as their plaything. But True the Vote, Judicial Watch, our other guests, we're telling them that we're here to fight on the ground to protect the election of the integrity of the elections. We have filed the first lawsuits in Ohio and Indiana demanding that the rolls be cleaned of dead people. If you have over 100% of the if you have over 100% of those living there on the rolls, there's a problem in terms of legality. Now, the Justice Department ought to be there, but they're on the wrong side. They're attacking voter ID. In Florida, they began to even ask questions about whether non-citizens were on the rolls. The Justice Department, the Obama Justice Department, sued Florida to stop them from even asking questions as to whether non-citizens were on the rolls. Why would you be opposed to efforts to remove non-citizens from the rolls? Is it because you want to be able to have their votes in the end? I think so. So the topic about stealing elections, it's not too strong a phrase. We need to be sure that the election outcome, no matter how it is not only free, fair, and clean, but that it appears to be free, fair, and clean. And if we don't do it, less people will vote on both sides of the aisle. Less people will have confidence in the outcome of the election on both sides of the aisle, and our republic will suffer as a result. Now, you may see the folks here on this panel. We are few, but we're happy to be in the battle for election integrity. As I said, the left has seen this as their bailiwick. Well, now conservatives have arrived on the scene. We're filing lawsuits. We're mobilizing the grassroots. We're educating the people about election integrity, and they're losing these battles. So I want to get to our excellent panelists here. A person on the front lines is Catherine Engelbrecht. I'll introduce her first. President of True the Vote. Catherine, please come out and sit down. Scott Gessler, Colorado Secretary of State. Christine Svensson, a board member of the Republican National Lawyers Association. And Hans von Spakovsky of the Heritage Foundation. Hans, please come out. It's a special honor to be introducing Judicial Watch client and friend, Catherine Engelbrecht of True the Vote, who has the first grassroots organization to get the citizens out there to monitor the polls and make sure the elections are honest. And her partnership with us is tremendous. But on top of her efforts to clean up the rolls with Judicial Watch and our litigation, their grassroots efforts are into so many areas related to election integrity. She's become a target of attack by the left. So she deserves a special round of applause for her standing up for truth here. Thank you. Catherine, please come on up.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. It is awesome to be here. It is a privilege to be here. And it is my honor to be on stage with Secretary Gessler and Christine and Hans and Tom. These are historic days, ladies and gentlemen, and it's pretty humbling to be a part of all of it. I want to share our experience with you because I represent something a little different on this stage. You have the panel of experts that you're going to hear from. I am the average American that didn't quite know how to plug in and found out that we could go to work at the polls, and further then found out that there were some problems. About 2009, a small group of us decided to get together and go to work at the polls just because we'd heard that there was a need, just a void of volunteers. And when we did that, we saw problems. There was a lot of good stuff that happened there at the polls, but there was also a lot of very troubling instances, ranging from just confusion of process all the way through to what can only be described as election fraud. We saw people who would come in without any identification whatsoever and still be allowed to vote. Now, I know in some of the sister states you don't have to show any identification. In Texas, you do. You can show your Blockbuster card, but you still have to show something. We saw people who would come in with multiple registration cards, and when presenting the first one, they would be told, "Oh, I'm sorry, it looks like you've already voted early. Pull out the next registration card. Well, how about this one? Oh, that's great. Go ahead and go vote." Wow, really? But in 2009, when we saw this, we didn't know what to do. Sort of deer in the headlights. Like, you just don't think that that's going to happen. Not in America, right? And so we got back together after Election Day 2009, and we compared notes. And most of us had had wonderful experiences that made you proud to be an American. But there were some who came back with these stories, and we recognized at that point that the day had come when we could no longer just say, "Boy, I hope somebody does something about that. Boy, I hope the government has a plan to fix that." Ladies and gentlemen, I submit that we've thought for far too long that government was fixing far too many things, and it's time that we roll up our sleeves and fix some things ourselves. So was born True the Vote. True the Vote is a nonpartisan effort to encourage citizens to get involved in the electoral process. And what we do is provide the training and the technology and the support that you need when you step inside of those polls so that you know what's right, what's wrong, so that you can help to ensure that every American has an opportunity to participate in a free and fair election. I stress nonpartisan. This has never been about party. It has always been about principle. Yet, as Tom mentioned, we seem to be a magnet for slings and arrows from the left, and that is undeniable. I wish it weren't the case, but it is. It is very troubling to think that anyone would be against election integrity. If you're against election integrity, ladies and gentlemen, what are you for? I'll let you talk quietly amongst yourselves about that one. Here's the bottom line. If we choose not to get involved right now in our elections, we will continue to see corruption in the polls, and we will continue to see that corruption rise to the highest offices in the land. We no longer have an option. Now, True the Vote is active in 35 states. We are on target to mobilize 1 million citizens to go to work at the polls. We have a booth here with a little ad in the program. You can check us out. But here's the deal. We will help you. We will train you. We will support you. But the first move has to be yours. You have to sign up, and then we'll work together. But we need you to step out, because without it, ladies and gentlemen, if our elections are not truly fair, then we're not truly free. And I thank you so much for the privilege of delivering the message to you.
Thank you, Catherine. Our next speaker is also under attack from the left for doing common sense things related to election integrity. The Honorable Scott Gessler is currently the Secretary of State of Colorado. Prior to becoming Secretary of State, he was a federal prosecutor, and prior to that, he was an expert election law attorney. So it's my honor and privilege to introduce Secretary of State for Colorado, Scott Gessler.
Thank you very much. Let me start off by, of course, welcoming CPAC to the great state of Colorado. Some of us would say the greatest of states in Colorado. So I was elected back in November of 2010 and took office in January of 2011. And I think most people would agree that when it comes to elections, it should be easy to vote, but tough to cheat. And, I've focused on both efforts. But the tough to cheat tends to draw a little bit of controversy. And I think you're going to hear from some folks who have really great examples of the vulnerabilities and the problems we have throughout our country. But what I was really struck by after taking office is the level of anger and the level of intensity with which the left opposes efforts to make sure we've got clean and accurate voter rolls and honest elections. And I've thought a lot about that, to think about what drives them. And so I guess the topic here is, what the left doesn't want you to know. That's hard to answer because they're just so obvious in their behavior. But I think one of the things that's going on is the people who oppose election integrity efforts, they frankly don't care about vote fraud. They really don't care about it. They may say they do, but they don't. And when you argue with them, or when the public debate, this is sort of how the public debate goes. The left will argue there is no vote fraud, there really isn't any vote fraud. They'll say there's corruption in our ballot initiatives, they'll say there's corruption in campaign finance, but when it comes to voting in the booth, our hearts are pure and without malice, and ne'er shall a dark thought cross our minds. That's their attitude. And so you show them that there's fraud and mistake and abuse there. And then they change their argument. And they say, well, there's just a little bit. You haven't shown me very much. It's just a little bit. And so you may show them a few more, and there's more. And then they say, well, it's not organized, as if organization is the hallmark. And so sometimes we'll be able to actually show organization. And then they'll say, well, it hasn't affected an election. You can't prove to me that it's affected an election. And there's examples where it has affected an election. And then they'll argue, well, it's not widespread. And of course, for them, widespread is never widespread enough when it comes to vote fraud. It's always minimal. And then after you pin them down on that argument, they'll say, well, let's focus on getting people to vote, because that's really what America's about. And the reason why I'm become so confident that they just don't care about this is when you look at Colorado, we've made efforts to clean our voting rolls. We've also made massive efforts to register people to vote. Actually, those efforts have outweighed, from a resource standpoint, the non-citizen and photo ID issues. But the left doesn't care about that. They're only focused on denying that vote fraud exists. And it's unfortunate. I think the other thing that's going on is people on the left, to be frank, among us and others, are manipulative. They just manipulate this issue. And I think some people are very sincere when they deny vote fraud, or when they're misguided, but sincere. But I see two ways in which they really manipulate it. One is when it comes to illegally registering people to vote. Voter registration drives don't suffer the consequences. They'll go before people, for example, non-citizens. They don't care if they're non-citizens. They'll register them to vote. And if that non-citizen registers and then votes, they suffer serious consequences. Criminal prosecution, loss of the ability ever to become a citizen. But the voter registration drive doesn't suffer any of those consequences. So I think they're very happy to manipulate people into believing it's okay to ignore these laws. I think the other thing they're willing to do is manipulate people to demagogue an issue, to sort of try and rile up anger and use anger as a tool, and that's happened throughout our history, but to sort of manipulate people to get them angry against a make-believe enemy that doesn't exist in an effort to win votes, to demonize, frankly, people who are conservative and believe in limited government. This is the tool they use, and of course the ultimate card they play is the racism card. And they're more than willing to lie to do this. We've done some investigation into some voter registration drives. One person who was lying, telling people that they were no longer registered to vote. And when that person was confronted, they got very angry and they said, it doesn't matter what I say as long as I'm trying to register people to vote and get people mobilized. In other words, it's okay to demagogue an issue, this person thought, as long as their end is pure, the means justify the ends in that instance. And so we've seen that repeatedly. It's an unfortunate dynamic. I think the takeaway from all of this is the people who oppose election integrity on the left, they're never going to change their minds. They've really sort of dug their heels in. But the broad mass of people in America are common sense, and they agree with us. And so I think we have to remain steadfast in our efforts through solid evidence, persuasion, and patience. And ultimately, we will prevail in this battle. And thank you for being here, and thank you for all you do.
Well, like the President of the United States, our next guest is a lawyer from Illinois, but that's where the comparison ends. Christine Swenson is not only a lawyer in private practice with her own firm, she's a member of the board of the Republican National Lawyers Association and general counsel for the Cook County Republican Party. So I can imagine she has some war stories and other things to tell us about from being on the front lines on one of the worst states in terms of election fraud. Christine Swenson.
Good afternoon. It's great to be here. And yes, I do in fact hail from the Windy City. I also think that I'm presumed to be an election law expert based upon the mere fact of my zip code. Gives me a lot of pedigree. And it is true. We do, in Chicago, we are considered the election fraud, quote unquote, model for other big cities, Philly, Milwaukee, Los Angeles, and on and on. And what does the left not want you to know about election fraud? Well, let's take a look at the history of voter fraud in Chicago. It's a fun, fascinating topic. Goes way back, but it's easy to trace back to Al Capone. He murdered, pillaged, and plundered elected officials to get his way back in the 30s, and it's been on a run ever since. The federal prosecutor there actually found evidence of repeat voters and some boarding house bums given a shot of whiskey for a vote. And while there were 667 contempt charges back in the 30s against election officials, all but 3 cases were dismissed by a Democrat judge. Then we go on to the Kennedy-Nixon contest of 1960. Now, Old Man Daley actually promised Kennedy, Illinois, and in so doing said, we're going to, quote, with the Democrat organization and the help of a few close friends, unquote, the Democrats would prevail on Election Day. Again, evidence of voter fraud, but not much happened. Then let's fast forward to 1972. An amazing story, a gentleman by the name of Bill Mullen. Eric O'Keefe would be proud of this man. He was a Tribune reporter, the Chicago Tribune reporter, who went undercover at the Chicago Board of Elections, uncovered massive fraud. He actually surreptitiously claimed voter applications, registrations, ballot applications, etc., stuffed them in his pants and his sleeves, went back to the Tribune's office, copied them, and boom, a huge, massive conspiracy was uncovered. That involved the prosecution indictments of over 75 people and the conviction of the county clerk. 1980s, a phenomenal story told by Hans von Spakovsky, our speaker, in one of his wonderful articles and his book. Basically, the U.S. Attorney estimated that there were over 100,000 fraudulent votes cast in the 1982 gubernatorial race between Jim Thompson and Adlai Stevenson. Margin was only 5,000. Thank God the good guys won. Republican USA came out again, issued indictments, hasn't stopped it. So where are we now? Is voter fraud still going on in this massive way in Chicago? Well, in my experience, or in my opinion, I should say, it is still going on, but they're very smart about it. And it's not retail theft. First of all, there are 2,000 precincts in the city of Chicago. We're enormously outmanned, and Republicans only get 20% of the vote there. So you can already tell, what the state of the situation is there. We get our election judges in there as best as we can. But if we don't fill those slots, the Democrats come in and slate them, I should say. And so we're fighting against the machine every single day. It's a very difficult uphill battle. But if we're not in that precinct, we lose, 300 to 1. If we're there, we might lose, 250 to 50. But as we all know, with the margin of votes, that can make the difference in an election. So the other thing is, this is I think the fraud du jour of Chicago these days, absentee ballot fraud. It's the easiest thing to do. What these unions do is, and there's AFSCME, SEIU, you name it, they're very powerful. And what they'll do is they will request absentee ballot applications ahead of time. I'm sorry, the actual registrations. They will fill out the application, get the ballot. They will not mail it in if they don't have to, unless there's a closely held election. I saw this in 2010. Joe Walsh, Tea Party favorite, beat an incumbent, Melissa Bean, in the 8th Congressional District of Illinois. We had to overcome a situation like this, where they were mailing absentee ballots in at the last minute. So, yes, it still goes on, but they're much more clever about it. What do I recommend in the future? Make sure you do your homework first. Use Google Earth. Try to research these abandoned buildings. Try to make sure these people exist. Because it's very difficult to overturn an election after the fact. So use all the internet information you can ahead of time. Be vigilant. Thank you, and thank you for all you do.
Thank you, Christine. Our next guest is another leader and fighter on this issue. He was leading when he was Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights, helping enforce our voting laws in a sensible way at the Justice Department. He was a leader in his pro-First Amendment tenure as a member of the Federal Election Commission, and obviously providing additional leadership now that he is with the Heritage Foundation as a senior legal fellow. Hans von Spakovsky, let me tell you, is one of the leading intellectual lights and legal lights on behalf of strong, free, fair, and clean elections in America today. He has a new book out with John Funn called Who's Counting? And I'm honored to introduce Hans to you right now. Thank you.
Well, I appreciate the invitation to be here today. And yeah, I do have a new book out. And this book does two things. It goes through and lists real cases of voter fraud that have occurred in recent years, fraud that has changed the outcome of elections. And it kind of demolishes this false narrative you hear from the left and in the media that there's no voter fraud, we don't need to worry about it. If you do a Google search just in the past month, you'll turn up case after case, like a state legislator in Arkansas who I think 2 weeks ago resigned his office after being convicted of voter fraud along with 3 other individuals in an election that he won, committed fraud in, that was decided by only 8 votes. Now, the other thing we do in here is we have a whole series of recommendations on how to fix this problem, everything from voter ID to requiring proof of citizenship when you register to vote. Now, for making recommendations like that, I've been called every name you can think of. And, there was a certain senator from Illinois who put a hold on my nomination to the FEC. He now resides at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. But the reason he put a hold on me, he explained in an op-ed. And it was because I had actually written an article in which I had recommended that people show photo ID when they go to vote. He believed that that made me unqualified to be a public servant. Now, I mention that because the subject of this is, what does the left not want you to know about voter fraud? Well, what they don't want you to know is that, and I have a whole chapter in this book about this, is that the Justice Department, where I used to work, the Civil Rights Division, whose responsibility as a law enforcement agency is to enforce federal voting rights laws, which protect Americans from discrimination in the voting process, that protect our military voters and guarantee their right to vote. That is supposed to be a nonpartisan agency, one that protects all Americans. And what the left doesn't want you to know is that the Civil Rights Division these days is basically the in-house lawyers and in-house counsel for the Obama re-election campaign. Okay, they are partisan, they are not objective, and they are doing everything from, I think Tom mentioned earlier, does it seem like a coincidence to you that at the very same time that the president has declared this general amnesty for people who are in the United States illegally, that the Civil Rights Division would file a lawsuit in Florida claiming that Florida taking non-citizens off the rolls is somehow a violation of federal law? I mean, that is was such an absurd lawsuit, and you sit there and think, how could they do that? But they did. In 2009, one of the career chiefs in the Civil Rights Division recommended to the Obama political appointees that they investigate and potentially prosecute 8 states for not cleaning up their voter rolls as they're required to do under federal law. Those investigations were never opened, no lawsuits were ever filed, and the chief was told, along with the other lawyers, that it was the policy of this administration not to enforce that provision of federal law. In other words, they want inaccurate voter rolls, the kind that the Pew Foundation found in a study that showed that there were 2 million people who are dead still on the rolls. There are almost 3 million people who are registered in more than one state, all of which provides the ability to commit fraud, like, for example, the Democratic candidate in Maryland, 1st Congressional District, who about 3 weeks ago had to resign after it was discovered that she had registered and voted in both Maryland and Florida. But of course, voter fraud doesn't happen. The other thing you need to know about this is that there are efforts being made outside of the government to actually do something about this. Okay, we have some great secretaries of state now who are actually trying to solve this problem, like Scott Gessler, like Chris Kobach, who's in Kansas, and other secretaries of state who actually believe in having fair elections, having integrity in the election process. They're doing this despite being attacked in the media and despite being attacked in court, and we should applaud and help them. Let me end with this. I've been in elections for a long time, and one of the reasons I'm in this is because of my family background. I'm a first-generation American, you can tell by my name. Both my parents had experience growing up with dictatorships, and the 2 things I learned from them as a child was this. 1, I was very lucky to be living in this great democracy, but 2, democracies can be very fragile. And the key to maintaining our democracy is eternal vigilance by its citizens, and that means all of you. So I ask you in the upcoming election, get involved, become a poll worker, be a poll watcher if you can't do that, or participate with a citizen organization like True the Vote to help maintain the integrity of the election process. Thanks.
Thank you. Well, my first question for the panel, and you've each talked a little bit about this, but I want to get a little more detail. When you're thinking about this election and any upcoming elections, where are the severe weak points that we as activists ought to be focusing on, or legal experts or secretaries of state, and where should the media be focusing on as opposed to all the noise and the race card playing that's being engaged in now? Where are the real problems in terms of immediate threats to the integrity of the elections? Why don't we just go down the line here?
Well, then I will speak from the citizen activist perspective. I think it is vastly underreported that there is a need for citizens to work at the polls. I used to just kind of vote and didn't really know how the votes were counted. Who's counting? I didn't know. I just, I'd voted and gotten my I voted sticker, and I thought that made me golden citizen. There are tremendous numbers of citizens needed to work at the polls, hundreds of thousands. So that would be my suggestion. And
how are you doing, and what are you doing to get that done?
Well, we are providing...
That's called a softball.
Thank you very much. We're providing training, state-specific training. God love the 10th Amendment. Every state runs their elections a little differently, but we're providing training to equip citizens to work inside of the polls, and our goal is to leave no polling place unmanned, and we're going to give it our all.
Secretary of State, can you speak to this as Secretary of State, also as
former federal prosecutor and private attorney?
Sure. I would second the comment that having poll watchers, having election judges from both parties is just critical, because it's those eyes and ears are the strongest deterrent factor that we have, by far. They're the strongest deterrents that we have. The second thing that I always worry about is, we talk about fraud, mistake, and abuse, and one should never underestimate mistake. I know that in Wisconsin back in 2004, famous case of potential vote fraud. I say potential because there were a lot of prosecutions brought, but the line between fraud and incompetence in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, where there were 4,000 or 5,000 more votes than voters in that election, the line between that was very blurry. So making sure that the election officials do the right thing, and of course that goes back to the eyes and ears on the ground. The other sleeper issue that I worry about, and we have to think deeply about that in Colorado, is the absentee ballots. Absentee ballots are very popular in the state of Colorado. We have complex, difficult ballots. People like taking them home, studying them, spending some time on the ballot issues. And so about 70% of all of our voters vote by absentee ballot. But the very things that make that so useful and convenient for honest people, it's also a potential pathway for fraud.
Did you say 70% of the votes in Colorado will be by absentee ballot?
70%. So our election starts on October 15th in 11 days, when those absentee ballots start going out the door. So, so when you look at vote fraud, and of course I'll defer to Hans, who's and Christian from Chicago. Although I have to say I was a little bit jealous because I'm a lawyer from Cook County originally.
Oh, you're an
too.
Illinois lawyer too. Great. We have
Please
two
don't
Illinois
hold that
lawyers
against
here.
me too much.
That's great.
But when you look at the preferred pathway for vote fraud, absentee ballots is number one on the list. So we have to be real thoughtful about that.
Well, the absentee ballots, people assume back when absentee ballots were first introduced, I'm going to be out of town. There's no way I can be in town to vote. It's an emergency. I need an absentee ballot. That's a very different status than what it is today,
right,
in terms of what you're able to get and how easily you're able to get an absentee ballot.
Well, and it's geographic. I mean, Western states in particular use absentee ballots very heavily. You may be from the East Coast. When you're surprised by that number, people from the East Coast look at Westerners with real surprise when they figure out how many people vote absentee here. So it's it's a good thing in many ways, but it's also a worrisome thing in certain ways too.
Well, Christine, you've been in the belly of the beast, so you know what the arts are in terms of election deception and election corruption. What should we be looking out for in states other than Illinois, since you know that's a great export from Illinois?
Sure. Well, I would echo what Catherine and Scott referred to with regard to the election judges. Poll watchers are helpful too, but election judges, that's golden. That's what we need, especially in big cities. Where it's the urban environments, and so there aren't that many Republicans there. You really have to protect those precincts. What I've seen, though, that can transfer to other big cities, that's the environment that I'm from, obviously, so I think that the advice I have probably relates best to other big cities. If you're running for a state rep race or a local race, I'm not talking about statewide race, but a local race, and you're anticipating a close race, I would, again, look at the absentee voters that requested ballots, or look at the voters that requested absentee ballots, I should say, and look at the newly registered voters before the election. Go to Google Earth, go walk the streets, make sure that those buildings are not crack houses, row houses, slumlord houses, whatever they are, gas stations, Dunkin' Donuts. I had a case in 2011 whereby my client, this is a horrible outcome. He ran for alderman of the 45th ward of Chicago. It's a nonpartisan office. But he is a Republican. He, on election day, was 29 votes down. He hired me the day after the election. We had a very narrow window to contest this election. That window came and went. 3 weeks later, his staffers, who were so beloved to him, continued to do work. They found out that 65 people actually registered at the Dunkin' Donuts and voted. had we known this beforehand or within the right window, I could have done something about it. So you do have to do your homework ahead of time. It's very difficult from a litigation perspective to overturn these election results. So do your homework.
Well, in a place like Illinois, the irony is that Democrats outside the machine are as much of a victim of this type of fraud as a Republican running in a heavily Democratic state.
It is ironic, and yet they still deny that voter fraud exists.
Hans, what should we be worried about?
Well, I would echo what Scott said. Something about like 12 or 13 years ago, the Florida Law Enforcement Department issued this extensive report about voter fraud, particularly because there had been a long series of prosecutions of voter fraud cases in Florida. And they called absentee ballots the tool of choice of vote thieves. And that's really true. I mean, that doesn't mean that other fraud doesn't occur. Other fraud does. But absentee ballots, because they're so easily obtained, no election official ever sees the person, and particularly because you can get registered today with Motor Voter without anybody ever seeing you, absentee ballots are the choice if you want to steal an election. Now, a number of states have done something about that, and more states need to do it. And this is actually a recommendation in our book, and that is a number of states, including Kansas, Alabama, and Pennsylvania, have passed laws that not only require a photo ID when you vote in person, but they also have an ID requirement for absentee ballots. And that is a legislative fix that needs to happen, quite frankly, in every state across the country.
Before we leave, I want to make a point that the number of absentee ballots that are coming in, staggering numbers, there are ways that citizens can be involved in the process of making sure that the application and the ballot signatures match. Typically, you have opportunities to work on boards called early ballot or early election ballot boards. Go and check out at your county level or within your party where you can get plugged into that, but there are ways for citizens to be involved in monitoring absentee ballots as they're coming in.
What our study found in states like Pennsylvania and Ohio and Colorado, there were at least 20% of the electorate, as much as 20% of the electorate or the people on the rolls shouldn't be there. And it seems to me one check besides cleaning up the rolls is to have a voter ID requirement of some type. Certainly, if you know someone's dead, you can vote in their name if you don't need a voter ID. But if you need a voter ID, it's going to be harder to vote in someone else's name who shouldn't be on the rolls. Give us a state of play, I'll give it to Hans first and then everyone else can jump in, as to what the state of play is on voter ID. The left is challenging them in court, but there's still law of the land in 30 states. And where does it stand now?
There's about a dozen states that have passed good photo ID laws. These are laws that require a government-issued photo ID. There's probably about another 20 states that have some form of ID required, not exactly photo ID. And then there's, unfortunately, many states like New York where you don't require any ID at all. The state of litigation on this is actually people in favor of photo ID are actually winning, although it may not seem like it if you're reading the New York Times or the Washington Post. Most of you probably know that back in 2008, the U.S. Supreme Court upheld Indiana's photo ID law and said that it was constitutional, not a burden on voters. The Texas photo ID law recently was found to violate the Voting Rights Act. This is because the Justice Department objected to the law under a special provision of the Voting Rights Act, Section 5. Texas has said that it's going to appeal that decision to the U.S. Supreme Court. I think they're going to win when they appeal that decision. In Pennsylvania, just last week, a judge issued a decision that I would call a decision where the League of Women Voters who were plaintiffs in the case, they may have won the battle, but they lost the war. Because what the court said in that particular case, and it's a good photo ID law, is that the photo ID law is not going to be in place for this election because he said that it's too short a time period to be able to implement it. But he limited his order just to this election. So what's going to happen is in the future, in future elections, that photo ID law, I have no doubt, is going to be in place, although it may not be for this one. We are waiting to hear on South Carolina. The Justice Department also objected to South Carolina's photo ID law. Again, there's been a federal court hearing on it. We're waiting for the judges to issue a decision. And I should say on that case something very interesting. My colleague at PJ Media, Christian Adams, who I used to work with at the Justice Department, actually wrote an interesting article about 3 weeks ago. He discovered that, in fact, the career lawyers in the Civil Rights Division had recommended approval of South Carolina's voter ID law because they said it was not discriminatory, and they were overturned by the political appointees in the Justice Department.
Well, who are these political appointees? You know, we say this, you know, Christian, as you know, has done a lot of reporting on that. Christian Adams and Pajamas Media has exposed where a lot of these so-called career hires have come, certainly at the supervisor level. Could you, I think it's important to disclose that to let them know who we're fighting.
Well, I'll give you an example of the kind of folks that run the Civil Rights Division at the Justice Department. The head of that division is a man named Thomas Perez. I've written a lot about him, but I think you can summarize what kind of person he is by the fact that about a month ago, in a lawsuit brought by Tom Fitton from Judicial Watch, they had filed a Freedom of Information Act request trying to get all of the internal documents on the decision by the Civil Rights Division to dismiss the new Black Panther voter intimidation case after they'd already won it. The department refused to turn over documents. Judicial Watch sued, and about a month ago, Judicial Watch won that lawsuit, and in fact, the judge awarded attorney's fees to Judicial Watch because he said that the Justice Department's refusal to turn over these documents was not justified, but of great interest, he said that the internal documents showed that Thomas Perez, the head of the Civil Rights Division, had lied under oath when he testified before the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights when it was investigating the dismissal of the new Black Panther voter intimidation case. That's the kind of political appointees who are running that division, people who a federal court has said basically perjured themselves in order to deny that the politicos there had interfered in that case.
That's a better answer than I would have come up with. I work at Judicial Watch. Scott, how is it easy or hard to get an ID to, what's the ID status in Colorado?
So the state of play in Colorado is we do have a voter ID requirement, but it's a very weak one. So for example, a utility bill will serve as voter identification. So it's better than a poke in the eye with a sharp stick, but we need to go a long way. We've had debates in the state legislature, and like a lot of places, this has fallen in the partisan hole where Republicans have been very strongly supportive of photo identification. Democrats have said no under no circumstances. And that's the way it is normally in the country, except for Rhode Island, deep blue state. They passed photo ID because they were tired of some of the corruption they'd seen. I think, though, as you see, and I'll just make these points quickly because I've litigated election cases as well. I agree with Hans. We are winning this debate. And I'll give you 3 reasons why I think we're winning it. One is we do have states with photo identification, and we're able to collect evidence now that refutes the left's argument. I mean, Georgia and Indiana show that voter participation goes up with photo identification. So we've got the evidence now to actually make the case. Secondly, even folks on the left are beginning to come over. You know, I always teasingly say that if I wanted to call central casting for a movie to get the mainstream media, liberal mainstream media, they would send me the Denver Post editorial board. And the Denver Post editorial board 2 times now has editorialized in favor of photo identification. So they're in favor of it, and the vast majority of Americans are. Thirdly, some of the litigation you see, I think, is sort of a natural reaction of judges. When stuff is just before an election, then both sides come in hooting and hollering about their point of view, and the left says this is going to reduce turnout. A judge, consistently, I've seen this over time, normally their first reaction is going to be, let's not do any harm, and we'll err on the side of letting people vote even if it risks vote fraud. So I think you see those initial reactions always just before an election. But after the election, when cooler heads prevail and people are able to analyze it, we get better law out of the case. So I think over time, we're going to win this battle, and we will have much better elections throughout the country here.
Well, you know, I think the left and the right can come across the aisle together and realize that perhaps an issue that we can mutually agree on is that it's probably more expensive than it needs to be to get basic identification required to get a voter ID, to get a copy of your birth certificate. You know, usually these state fees are much more than they need to be. They're just a way to gather revenue as opposed to cover costs. And if we make it more easily, at least cheaper, to get access to your birth certificate and things like that, the objections to voter ID, I think the left is going to have to acknowledge, would fall away. And as small government conservatives, the less fees we're paying to the government, the better. So there may be a nice middle ground there.
I would take issue with you
now,
on that.
As a Secretary of State, I can imagine you might.
Well, the reason why I say that is
hear you.
because we had those proposals in Colorado.
Right.
If you have a demonstrated need, it is free to get a driver's license or state ID. And to get a birth certificate, we propose legislation where my office, if someone couldn't afford their birth certificate, would pay for it.
Right.
We do that. Unfortunately, we still have people who have dug their heels in and aren't paying attention to that rational argument. I think will ultimately prevail.
Yeah, I think we will too.
And the other thing about this you all need to realize is that the claims that are made about these huge number of Americans who don't have photo ID are so widely exaggerated that I sometimes have to laugh at them, even when I see them in so-called serious newspapers. All of the surveys, the real surveys have been done about this, show that the number of individuals who don't already have a photo ID is probably less than 0.5%, not the 10%, not the 25% you hear from other organizations. And this has also been proven by real data, not speculation, but real data. In Georgia, for example, the photo ID law has been in place for 6 years. They provide a free photo ID to anybody who doesn't have one. They keep statistics on that. And the statistics show that with 6 million registered voters in the state, the number of people who have applied for a free photo ID because they don't already have one has averaged less than 0.05% per year. I mean, it's a tiny, tiny percentage. So getting the very few people who don't have an ID is very easy. And in fact, we should be happy that people have to get an ID like that. Why? Because you cannot function in today's society without an ID. And anyone who doesn't have one, we are doing them a favor. We are helping them to get the identification they will then need to do all kinds of things like if they want to apply for public assistance or welfare, you need an ID. You want to do all kinds of other things, you need an ID.
Catherine, I have a question for you. Christina, I have a question for you. I'm going to ask them and then divvy up the time. What's the response of elected officials that you're alerting voter election fraud issues? What's their response? And Christine, what happens in a disputed election? Are we going to have another 2000? And what do you expect each party to be doing in the days after the election if it's in dispute? So, Catherine, why don't you go first?
The response that we're getting has been overwhelmingly positive. Elected officials appreciate that citizens are finally waking up and getting involved. But I think even more than that, citizens are finally recognizing that it is really up to us, and there really is a need. Election integrity is, this year, playing for all the marbles, and we really can't leave anything to chance. We need to make sure that all the polling places are full. If we've had an opportunity to look at the registries and make sure, as Christine said, make sure that the addresses are valid, turning those kinds of information over to elected officials, that oftentimes helps to make sure that the voter rolls are clean by the time we get to the polls. But it's really about, I think, recognizing that this is, in fact, up to us. Our elections were always meant to be run by citizens at their most fundamental level. And once we forget that, we've turned over a great bit of control. And I would submit that photo voter identification is not about election integrity. Or the argument for it, the argument against photo voter identification is not about election integrity, just like the health care bill was not really about health care and cap and trade was not really about energy. It's about control. And they don't want to cede control. And until we can have those kinds of discussions, it's going to be an uphill battle.
Christine, could you lead us out as to what happens the day after election if there's fighting to be had?
Sure. Would you like an answer with respect to Illinois or generally?
You have 5 seconds either way.
Oh, all right. Wonderful. If an election doesn't go your way, you've got an uphill battle. And you've got to make sure that you get your operatives out on the streets the day after the election, researching. You've got to get basically you have to get the list of the individuals that selected absentee ballots Go to those homes, find out if you could even call them, by the way. You can get affidavits on whether or not they've sent them in. But it really hinges around those absentee voters out there, if you can turn them around. And it's a very complicated formula in Illinois. So go in on an election day and win on that day, because afterwards you're going to have a lot of trouble.
Well, each candidate will have plenty of lawyers to be doing
That's right.
that, I'm sure. An excellent panel, don't you think? Thank you very much. And we're going to head out and begin the next panel. Thank you very much.